Picking up where we left off, we're going to continue with fonts, and specifically we're going to start styling some of this other text, like this H2 over here, or excuse me, H1 and the H2. We've already styled the call out where it says "Be good to yourself." So let's take a look in our CSS down here. I'm going to move this up. All right, and right here, so if you remember, we set the H1, H2, and the call out so that the font family was Montserrat. Okay, and then it has some fallbacks of Open Sans, Helvetica, Arial, Sans Serif. Okay, and then specifically we want to tell each one of those in a different rule which font size and color and so on to be. All right, so one of the things I'm going to go ahead and do is down below where it says call out. If you remember, call out was applied up here to this paragraph tag, right? You can see that there. All right, so now what we need to do is come down and we need to make a new rule yet again, and we're going to choose the H1 this time. All right, and we're just going to make it for the H1, and I still want it to be I want to keep the font family the same, but we've already set the family. If you remember up here, we set the family. But now we just want to talk about font size and some color and things like that. So let's do font size. And let's try, the other one was, I think, 3M. Yeah, that's pretty big. So let's make this a little bit smaller, and we can do like maybe 2M. But it's still bigger than it really was before. And you can see it's really hard to read because it's still black. So it might look nice if we just use the same color as we did for the call out. So I'm going to copy this color. Let's do a copy. And I'll come down here to H1 and I'll paste it. And already that stands out a little bit better. But again, we've got the same problem where we need some sort of text shadow. And let's just see what happens if we copy this text shadow. I'm not going to use the whole thing though. I think I'm just going to use, let's just see what happens if we copy just the first part of it. Remember, we put 2 text shadows on the call out. I think maybe we'll just try 1 on this one, and I can terminate it right there. And already that looks a little bit better. It's a little bit easier to read. Something else that we can also do, I don't think that we did this in the other one. Let's see, let's take a look. This is the example, right? Yeah, we didn't do this in the other one. This might look nice actually as all caps also, you know, it's sort of to be similar to the "Be good to yourself." I'm just curious, and if I want to show you how to do that, there's a property that is called text-transform, okay, and it has some different things like capitalize, which means it'll give it an initial cap for each word, and that's what we already have there. But we also could do like lowercase, for instance, if you wanted to see what that looked like. Oops, it needs to be lowercase. And then it makes all of the letters lowercase. If we did uppercase, it would make everything uppercase. All right. And you might want to try something like that. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe I like the original way. And so if we want to kind of be able to toggle this on and off, I can highlight this line for text transform, and I can do Command or Control / and just comment that line out. And then you see that it puts the / asterisk * around it, and so it's just ignored. So I'm going to get rid of the text transform on it, and we can maybe try that out later whenever we change around some other properties like padding and margin and stuff. So the next thing we want to do is make my H2 rule, and first of all, let's just change the color on that so that we can see what we're dealing with better. And for right now, let's just say that we want it to be white. At least we can see it better, but that might be a little bit too bright. So one of the things that I might consider doing is, going down here to the assets and finding something that is an off-white that's, you know, maybe in the same family. We could try, let's just see what happens if I go with this color and sort of get in that general vicinity of something different. It's less bright, it has a little bit more of a natural color, but it still doesn't seem quite right to me. It's still got a little bit of like a taupe kind of color, like a beige kind of color to it. And so I want to see if I can get a little bit closer to the real color. And if I go back to assets and I look through the colors, I don't know that I see anything that fits the bill exactly. I want to show you a little quick trick. There's this button down here, if I go and look at this as full screen, the thing that's kind of nice is that I can right click the text and I can say inspect. And I'm in Google Chrome right now, and Safari has this capability, but you have to turn on the developer tools. Firefox also has this capability, but I'm going to show you in Chrome. That's usually the one that I mostly use for the inspector tools. And as long as I had that text selected right here where it says H2, it shows me that it's selected over here on the left side for the HTML. And yours, by the way, if you were to do this with me, you know, yours might show up on the right side kind of like this or something, right? So if I go back here and I right click and inspect that text, it still picks it. But then what it does is down below, it shows me in the CSS how it's being styled, and it shows me that this H2 right here is the selector that's being applied to the H2 and the HTML up here. So one thing that's kind of cool with the Chrome inspector is that for color, if I click on the little sample color right here, then you can come over and you can start to adjust this a little bit. So, you know, like for instance, you could change this so that it ends up being somewhere in the right vicinity, except that I think maybe I don't want it to be quite so yellow, so I could, you know, drag this down and, you know, kind of come up with this color. And I think that that might be an okay color. I mean, you could pick a very similar color, something you're comfortable with, but this feels more like it's in tune with the rocks, the color of the rocks, than the other. You can also, by the way, take this sample and you can literally grab a sample of a color, like, and you know, I like this color, this FFF3EO, but if I wanted to just try to sample something and say, let's take a sample from like that color, right? And then it's dark, but then I could, you know, maybe pull it up so that it has brighter and pull it over this way and see if I like it better. I think what I had before was better, so I think it was FFF3EO or something like that. I think I like that, and so I'll just hit the return key and commit to that. And now I can just take this and I can copy it. This is, by the way, not permanent at all. And I can close this up, you know, come back over here, and I need to change my view back so I get my layout again. I want to change this one. That's the one I meant to change. All right, and so I think that might be a pretty good set of colors. Let's go ahead and change the color of this text down here as well. And I could make a rule specifically for it, or the other thing that I could do is I could go up to the very top in the body, right? And I could tell the color for all the type to be that color, right? And so let's actually just paste that. And then it makes everything that color, except you'll maybe wonder why the call out and the H1 are not that color. Well, the reason that they aren't that color is because lower, after the body is declared, you'll see that we tell the color of this particular text to be orange, that orangey color, and also this text to be orange. And we do that like on line 28 and on line 21. And that ends up overriding the color that was placed on all the text in the entire body up here. So it means that you can override stuff and be specific if you want, all right? And so that means that if I like that color for the H2, then I don't necessarily even have to state it here because it already is going to get that color because that's the color within the body. Okay, so we haven't saved this for a while, so let's just do a quick save on that. And you know, I had mentioned before that the problem that I'm having is that I can still put a drop shadow back behind this, and I will go ahead and do that, but I think that there might be some other choices that we could try as well. Let's go ahead and let's just take this shadow, this text shadow, and let's copy that and see what happens if we apply that also to the H2. And that actually, I think, did help a little bit. And we could also apply it to the article paragraph. And just to be really clear, we can look at something to make sure, all right, this paragraph is the one that we want to affect, this one that I'm highlighting in the HTML right now. All right, that's the one that we want to affect, and it is inside of the article. It's a descendant of the article. All right, and so if we want to affect that one and make sure that it doesn't affect this one up here, then instead of just saying P for paragraph like this, then what we could do is we can put right before the P, we can type the word article with a space. And the way that this works is that it means that any instance of a paragraph that is inside of an article will get the following properties. And that's what this space indicates. So whenever you're writing selectors and you put a space in between the selectors, and I don't mean like a comma and a space, like before when I showed you grouped selectors, that was different. This is showing descendant selectors. So, and I refer to it as selectors with specificity. And you'll also hear of them referred to as compound selectors, for instance. It means that any instance in this case of a paragraph that is inside of an article will get this property. So I'm going to paste that there, and you can immediately see that over on the right hand side that the drop shadow was applied, and it did make it just like maybe a tiny bit easier to read, even though it's not easy to read yet. We're still going to have to do some other stuff, but I want to make this clear. So this now definitely, where it says article P, that definitely will not affect the call out that's on line 1 of the HTML, because this call out that's on line 1 is not inside of an article. All right, so that's how descendant selectors will work, and it's really handy to use. All right, so let's look at this a little bit more closely. And one of the things now that as we look at this, that you're going to realize is that the contrast is still just not good enough. And so if you want to take a look over here, it's the finished example. One of the things that you'll notice is that there's sort of like this darker blue cast. And you could put some sort of darker cast on, let's say, the body, because if you think about it, the background image is actually on HTML, so it's like behind the body, if you want to think of it that way. And we can try that. Let's just really quickly try something like that. So if we go up to, first of all, let's take a look again and remind ourselves of how we've got this structured. So the HTML tag, which is the ultimate ancestor of all tags that are inside of the HTML document, this is where the background image is applied. All right, so if we come down to the body and we wanted to apply, let's say, a background color, let's just go ahead and do that real quickly. Let's do something like background, and then we'll do dash color. All right. If I just apply some color, like let's say blue, it's going to show up on top of the rest of it. And the reason is because that body tag is inside the HTML, and you'll notice that you can kind of see around the edges here, right? You can kind of see around the edges behind it, and you might be wondering why you can see around the edges. And the reason for that is because just like some of the other things in our page automatically have what are referred to as default browser styles, well, so does the body. The body has a default margin that is applied, and it's about 10 pixels all the way around. And the way to get rid of that is to first, well, let's put this at the beginning, is you can say margin. And if you, instead of margin bottom, margin left, margin right, margin top, we can also just use this shorthand for margin, and we can just say 0, and that means that it'll apply a 0 margin all the way around. Okay, and you see that it collapses it up to the edges. But you might look at this and go, wait a second, why is there a margin still at the top? All right, well, that's a whole different issue. The reason that's happening, and this is where we start to get into the box model conversation just a little bit, but every element is going to have a default browser style. And headings and paragraphs and block level elements all have margins. They all have default margins. And so what you're seeing is this paragraph, be good to yourself, you're seeing that having applied a top margin to it because it's a paragraph. And so if we find the thing that's called call out right here, all right, since it's applied to a paragraph, we can also come over here and we can say margin. And if we wanted to only address the top margin, we could say margin dash top 0 like this, and it collapses it. All right, and you're not going to know that except that I just told you, right? And now you'll have to sort of look more critically at that every single time you come across some kind of block level element. Now you might be looking at this down at the bottom now and going, wait, why is that happening? Well, it's happening for a couple of reasons, but the primary reason at the moment is because the page isn't long enough. And this is one of those things that's going to happen. If I were to pull this up a little bit, then you'll see that it ends up being okay. But as soon as I pull this down below where the content actually is, then you see that it starts to show uh, this bottom part that is the HTML behind it. Well, or just the rest of the document. All right, and so it's kind of a tricky, weird thing, right? Because I always will say the body is the viewport, but in this case, as you can see, since we have something applied to the HTML, you can actually see through behind where the content ends inside the body. And so that gets a little bit tricky. And so there's another way to deal with that. The other thing too, just really quickly, I want to point out is this bright blue color means that, see how if I hover right here, I get like the little hand for a link? Well, don't forget that there's actually a link right there, but because I made the background blue, you can't see it. So let's actually do something real quickly to, here, let's get rid of that space too. Let's make the background like pink or something else that's otherwise obnoxious, right? And you see, now you can see that blue link, right? And so there's that. All right. Now, and we're going to come back and change that color, by the way. We're not going to leave it pink. But I just want you to be able to see the space that it's taking up. One of the things that we can do then is, since the body doesn't seem to be filling up the entire space properly, we can give the body a minimum height so that it does fill up the space always, right? So what we can do is come over here maybe after the background color, and we can say min dash height. All right, and then we can give it 100 VH, which stands for viewport height. All right, and then it will always be at a minimum 100% of the viewport height. And you might say, well, why don't we just say 100%? It doesn't work that way. 100% is not the same as viewport height. So viewport height will actually go based off of the number that the browser is reporting back as the viewport height, and it will constantly get that number as you resize it too, which is great. And so the CSS will follow that. And so now we don't have to worry about being able to see, that space behind it. You might be going, well, wait, what about the picture? That the whole point is to have that picture? Well, yes, it is. So there's some different ways that you could address this. Instead of just a solid color, we've been talking sort of before about RGBA. We could do something like that instead, where we say, like, let's try black, 0, 0, 0. Remember, that's red, green, and blue channels with no light equals blackness. It's like walking into a dark room with the lights turned off, right? And then if we put another comma, we could say like 0.5 for 50%. And then suddenly that becomes more readable. Well, it's not very pretty. It's sort of dingy and ugly. Maybe what happens if we give it 50 for blue? That's not too bad, that color cast, but still, it makes it sort of like I don't know, an overcast day, even though it's not overcast. It's sort of like got this weird tinge to it, right? So one of the things that you might want to do instead is you might want to, let's just find a color, for instance, to start with in the assets, something like maybe in here, something that's kind of like a sky blue color, like yeah, let's try something in this ballpark. And we can use this as a foundation for right now. And we're going to open a new tab, and I want you to do a quick search for something called gradient generator. And it pops right up on my screen, all right? But gradient generator. And the first hit, Ultimate CSS Gradient Generator, it's awesome. Go ahead and go to that. It shows you up here what kind of gradient it's going to create, and it's going to do this all based in CSS, so you don't have to use an image file. So I'm going to choose a gradient type up here where it goes into transparency. All right, but except we don't want it to go from color to transparent at the bottom. We want it to be the opposite. So if you come over here where it says reverse, and click this little reverse button, you see that it will start at transparent at the top, right? Because this is what it's going to generate, and it goes to having the color at the bottom, which is kind of cool. So if you don't want to use this this color of blue, you can click on here and you can go and find your own color of blue if you want. And so if I click where it's got this color, I could, I could start to use the color slider and drag it up or down. I could also go ahead and paste a color in there, that sky blue color. And let's just see what this is going to look like. This might be a little bit too bright, but we can try it and we can always replace it. So what it did is it just generated all of the CSS for us. So I can just highlight all of that and then I can just right click and I can copy it. Perfect, right? And so if I come back over into my code editor right here, instead of having this thing that says background color, let's go ahead and let's delete that completely. And at the bottom of the body selector, or the body rule, is where I'm going to add that gradient. All right, because I don't want to, I want it to be at the bottom because all of this other stuff will be easier to read, because once I paste this, it's going to be a lot of code. So if I hit paste, you see that it goes ahead and puts it behind it. And it's all of this stuff that starts with this comma, and it tells me, hey, if you want to edit this or share the gradient, you can go to this particular URL, so that if you wanted to go and just make changes based off of this, you could just copy this and paste it into your address bar of a browser. And then it's got all of these different background rules. And I'm not going to go into all of how these things work, but you'll see that it's got background, 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 right? It's making all these different rules because you'll see that this is for Mozilla. All right, and then you'll see that the next kit is for WebKit. So Mozilla is what is generating Firefox's browser renders, and WebKit works for Safari and for Chrome. Those are the generators, and then this last one would be applicable to Windows-based stuff. It also works for Chrome 26 and higher, and so on, right? And it tells you which versions, and they keep up with it. It's really, really great. And then this is for IE 6 through 9, the older Internet Explorers. All right, so it works on all the different browsers, which is great. So if I don't like that color and I do want it, in fact, to be darker, then I'm going to go back to this generator, jump back over here to my color generator that's open, and oops. All right. And so the next thing that I want to do is I want to change this base color again. So I'll select this marker in the bottom right corner, and I'll then go to this color swatch, click on it, and let's move this down. I think I want to come somewhere down in this range possibly. Let's just see if we can get it right there. And I think that that's probably pretty good. We'll click OK, and it's a much, much darker blue. All right, so I kind of had it wrong and was guessing at something way brighter, and sometimes you just have to play around with stuff like that. Okay, so I think that that might work maybe, and let's select all of this. I'm going to copy it into my clipboard again. Let's come back over here into our code view, and you need to make sure that you delete the right amount of stuff. Don't accidentally delete these curly braces, okay? So I'm going to select all of that gradient generation that I did before. I'll hit delete, and it disappears and everything's okay. I'm going to go ahead and paste it back in there now. So let's do paste. That's a sort of a better looking color. The only issue is that it's pretty severe. So let's go back and take a look at our CSS generator again. And one of the things that you can pay attention to is like where the center line is. And right now you see that the location is at 50%. If I change that and I get rid of it, right, then basically I threw it over here to 100% and it gets rid of that center marker. And so it makes the transparency go much, much further so that there's not as much opacity. So let's recopy this, and let's copy that into our clipboard. And just in case you're wondering, like me show you something really quickly. I don't think I can redo it, but this number was at 50% right here, here, and here, and here. And so whenever I got rid of that center marker that showed the opacity stop, it was at 50%, and so I changed it so that it doesn't stop. Basically, it goes up to 100. All right, so I'm going to copy that. Let's go back in here, and again, let's replace it again and see if that looks any better. Let's go all the way down to the end here, and we'll paste, and that looks a whole lot better. I think that that's a lot more livable. I can handle that. And the thing that's nice about it is that because it starts completely opaque at the top, or excuse me, completely transparent at the top, you still get some of that sky blue. And if you wanted to try modifying it a little bit more, you could. That's really up to you. Like if you wanted to have it a little bit more transparent at the top, we could jump back over here. And the way that you could adjust that is you could take this bottom slider and you could see how it's like moving the opacity further down, right? And you can see how that's working up here too, right? So that you'll see that there's more transparency at the top this way. And let's just take a look and see what that looks like. So you can kind of explore these different options. I'm going to copy that into my clipboard again, and let's come back in here and we'll paste on top of that. And that might even be a little bit better. You might like that even more. All right, so there are some different ways that you can play with those gradients. And it's really up to you if you want it to be paler or not. And then you might look at this bottom link down here and go, wait, that's way too similar. Well, we're going to change the native link color for that anchor tag anyway. All right, and so let's go ahead. I'm going to stop this video here, and in the next one we're going to address how to change this into like a button that looks very button-like, and we will also deal with these margins and talk about padding and stuff so that this has better proportions.